Hello and welcome to Hire Results, where business, workforce, and talent intersect. I'm Melody Reagan, CEO of Eye to Eye Workforce and your host. And today we're having part 2 of the recruiting funnel. We're going to talk today about the bottom of the recruitment funnel, and this is where you go from candidate to hire. Now, why are we doing this recruiting series? In the United States, generally speaking, we have a very limited supply of talent, and it is a core competency that every business needs to have is the ability to recruit. Recruiting is ever more important because you need to find the talent that you need, and the majority of businesses, what is our largest expense? For the majority of us, it's actually talent. And it's really important that we get the right people in the seat on the bus, because if we don't, it's devastating. The expense to us is tremendous. And on average, if you look at a myriad of studies, on average, it takes us 6 months for an employee to become productive. And there are some studies, and depending on the position, it's 1 to 2 years. And to get it wrong is the best way I can describe it unequivocally. It is devastating. And with me today is, same as last time, I'm thrilled to say, Diane Mueller, who is practice principal with Eye to Eye Workforce. And Diane has a tremendous specialty in recruiting. Diane, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Melody. It's great to be here.
And would you tell everybody just a little bit about you?
So I've been a human resources professional for about 15 years cumulatively, and I've worked in a variety of industries. Most recently now, I've been working for several years as a human resource consultant for Eye to Eye. And I love coming into companies and just helping them with their HR needs and recruitment needs as well, and just becoming part of the team and helping them, giving them a fresh set of eyes on their human resources capacities and what they need. So that's where I'm at right now, and I love it.
Yeah, fantastic. And we love working with you. So, okay, so we're going to jump in, and let's say the bottom of the funnel. Now, let me go back. Why do we call this recruiting funnel? Because it is a funnel that defines the process. We identify candidates at the top of the funnel. We want it to be big and broad and to get as many potential candidates in so that we narrow to the bottom of the funnel so that we find that gem and hire the right person. So that's why it's referred to as a funnel. On top of that, when we talk about the bottom of the funnel, this is where we are going from candidate to hire. This tends to include the candidate application. We do qualifications and evaluation, and we select them for hire. And one of the other things that we include in the funnel is onboarding. We've learned that the onboarding process is really critical to a candidate's success. So let's jump in. And Diane, let's start off with the job application. What is a job application and what should it include?
So a job application is basically giving the candidate the opportunity to apply for the job and to list their credentials and their contact information regarding the job itself. So it's just a basic list of their contact information and their work history, their education, and just those basics that you need. And it's kind of an official way to enter the applicant process, the candidate process for a company.
Fantastic. And by the way, unlike a job description, which has no legal basis, it's nothing more. Your job description is a guideline. Job applications actually do have some legal requirements around them. Is there one or two that you want to share with us? Like, what are some do's and don'ts with the application form?
Well, you definitely want to ask about the basics, and it should be job related to the position itself. When you go into asking about things such as age and race and gender and veteran status and whatnot, you want to really be careful about those kinds of things and have it reviewed by a professional. And for the most part, those things should be voluntary kinds of questions. So you want to just be really careful when you put together your application.
Exactly. You really do around that. And there are some instances, nothing is ever fixed. Like we've worked with some employers where they have a grant or something and they have to have validation that they're recruiting to a specific group, etc. But these become the concerns, like Diane said. Along with that is understanding somebody's background. If they have been in jail or not is another one. There are quite a few states that do not allow you. It is illegal to actually ask those questions. So your job application is something you need to be a little bit careful about. So now in this process, because earlier on we talked about having a recruitment plan and getting a strong, solid process, now it's time for us to do a little bit of evaluating and bringing those candidates through the funnel. So you have the application. What's next? What's next?
So the thing that you want to do is probably collect the applications and kind of fan them out to the recruiting team and just get some general feedback as far as who's meeting the basic qualifications and collecting those folks into, a roster of some kind and getting that feedback internally as far as who do we want to pursue right now. And then also contacting those that are not going to make it to the next round and making sure that you're having that conversation with folks as well. I think it's really important. A lot of people don't communicate with candidates and they're kind of left in the dark. And so I think it's very appropriate to have that ongoing kind of feedback for people to know if they're advancing the process or not.
By the way, I think that beautiful point is about nurturing your candidates, making sure that you are conveying information to them throughout. Now, one of the things that Diane just talked about, we're going to use tools. So we're going to automate as much of the process as we possibly can, and you should do that as well. One of the downsides of automating your process is you can actually end up weeding out some great candidates. And one of the things that we encourage you to do is obviously use your tools, do your keyword searches, you look through your own database, which is one of the big sourcing places. We have a huge database. You should use your own database as well. But what you want to do is then also make sure that you're looking at those applicants. And what she's talking about, where you fan it out and then you shrink it down to a couple of candidates. Now, that's a bit where you're looking at it. Now we're ready to engage with the candidate. What do you recommend in terms of the first step of an engagement?
Well, I think it's really important to start with a pre-screen interview. So just a kind of a basic, usually an on the phone kind of conversation that you're having with a candidate. Develop those questions, and I want to just say this up front, develop those kinds of screening questions in advance so that you're not kind of winging it while you're reaching out to the candidate initially. So make sure that you develop a few questions just to pre-screen the candidate to see if there's going to be an initial fit there. So that would be my first step in the process.
So hitting that screening interview, and one of the things some of our clients have done, and you might consider, you might make some of your screening questions part of your application process, where they're completing it online so that you can look at it, so that you have something that is already automated, that's screening, but then typically you have HR or somebody in HR do that baseline screening. Now, why would you do that? Remember that it's on two sides. You have to woo that candidate. So it's getting the information you need, but it's also trying to get that candidate to have even greater interest in you and the company. So remember one of the things about this process, what's really important, particularly in this job market, is that it is a two-way street. All right, so we hit the screening interview, and one of the things that you and I have talked about, depending on the position, what I think is kind of fascinating is coming in and where you engage the rest of the department or company in the interviewing process. Historically, a lot of companies kind of like work their way up to the boss. And one of the things that we actually encourage is turn it upside down. Start with the boss, because we've watched tons of companies where they have everybody else interview this candidate, fall in love with them, and the boss actually is like, not a go. Because the boss is who knows the position, so turn it upside down and you get the screening. Where you have the good candidates, you want the boss to come in first and make sure that they're in alignment. And if whoever that is, the boss is who that individual is going to be reporting to, they may or may not do a screening interview as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that you want to be expeditious in your process and you want to be thorough. But you want to start with the right people in your screening process. Make sure that you're getting the right feedback and that you're all communicating and making sure that you're on the same page so that you're not encountering problems at the very end of the candidate process.
Exactly. And by the way, that's you want to avoid it. You want to get the information that you need as fast as you can so you don't waste more time. So then the next step is you may bring this person in to do face-to-face interviews. You may cycle once or twice. Part of that cycling of once or twice might be that you have them come in and interview with the boss, then come in and interview with the rest of the team, or it could be use phone, use video. You have a whole bunch of different modalities. But then when you go to interviewing with the rest of the team, because it really is important to involve everybody. Well, let's talk about interviewing and interviewing techniques. So we've already talked that sometimes it's phone, sometimes it's video, sometimes it's in person. How do I go about, and what should I do to involve everybody in the interviewing process?
Well, I think, again, it's really important, Melody, that you have the team come together at first with HR and identify the kinds of questions that you're going to be asking up front so that you're putting candidates through the same consistent process. And so you're not kind of winging it as you go, because that can create a lot of problems and it can create a lot of anxiety for both you as the interviewer and the interviewee as well. So you want to make sure that you're having a consistent process with consistent kinds of questions and situations. So you want to come together as a team and have it all organized in advance, and then put each candidate through the same kind of process as they move forward in the process. And I think one really good approach for that is the behavioral kind of interview situation.
Fantastic. And I love that you said that, because you know what, we've watched so many, just because you like a candidate doesn't mean that they can do a job. And the consistency in the questions where that's important is, if you and I are interviewing one candidate, we know you and I are evaluating them in the same base way, but we also know we're evaluating each candidate the same, so it helps us in our judgment. So it's really, really important. And the other thing is, we want the questions to match to the job. Now, behavioral interviewing, which we're big proponents of, we love it because what we know is past performance is the greatest predictor of future performance. So Diane, what is behavioral interviewing?
So it's a process where you ask the candidate to describe a situation and take us through the steps that they took in a particular job situation related to the job that they're interviewing for, and then to kind of describe what they went through, the steps they took, their thinking process, and then ultimately what the results of that of their process was, and what were their achievements and what were their setbacks, what were their challenges, and get them to talk about it in a very tangible way.
By the way, I love that it's very tangible. And just so you know, with behavioral interviewing, some refer to it as the STAR method. When you're asking the question, you're asking them, it's setting up what's the situation, the task, what action did they take, and what's the result. It's so funny. Years ago when I was in corporate, I actually hired somebody, and it was to be a product analyst on one of my product teams. And the sad part is, we took this person all the way through the interview and no testing or anything. And when they got to work, even though they knew the financial fundamentals, they didn't know how to use any of the tools.
Oh, okay.
They didn't know how to do Excel or anything. And it's like, and you know what? We didn't ask.
Right.
So, part of it is, it's setting them up and you can do it as generically as, tell me about a time you had a conflict. And tell me what the conflict was, how you resolved it, and what was the outcome.
Exactly.
So behavioral interviewing is a really important, it also tells you a lot about the candidate.
Exactly.
And how they're going to engage and what their process is, as opposed to just tell me about your background.
Exactly. And another thing I want to add is that sometimes it's really important to take a candidate through kind of a testing situation to test their skill levels and certain things, or even to do kind of a role play situation and see how they respond in that kind of environment. So related, of course, to the job itself. But I think it's important to maybe throw people into a situation and see how they respond. And I know that we've even talked about in the past, it's great if you can manage it, to have a candidate come in and visit for half a day and interact with staff and see how it goes.
By the way, exactly. Just so you know, simulation tools are becoming ever more important. In some instances, you might set up a certain situation, like with sales, have them come in and have them pitch you on your own product, just so you can see how they're doing. Now, there's a little bit of prep, and exactly what Diane just said, you can have a candidate come in for a half day, and if you need to, just engage with the team, see what it's like. You know, what you can do is you can come along and you can have them sign an NDA if you need for them to. All right, well, let's talk a little bit, because the other thing is simulations. There's like Pensight is a tool that we use. You know, there's a series of assessment tools that we use, everything from Profiles International to Myers-Briggs to Pensight, etc., that we use in the process. Let's talk about assessments. Do you think assessments have a place in the process for hiring, and how should they be used?
Well, I think absolutely you can use assessment tools in your process. And again, it's something that you want to discuss as a team to see that, make sure that there's some agreement on what we're assessing and make sure that it's related to the job. That's always very important. But yeah, I think giving people the opportunity to take an assessment and then compare the results against other candidates and see what kinds of skills and abilities and thought processes are we looking for in this particular role. An assessment can give you that kind of feedback.
You know what? I love assessments actually quantify things that can be, because it's like you're in a qualifying mode with your candidate. Now, here's the thing about assessments. You can have simulation assessments like Pensight. You can have others that are job specific, and we have a tool, Profiles International. We use the PXT, and what we love about the PXT is it matches candidates to a job profile, but it also produces, based on their results, a whole series of behavioral interviewing questions that can be used. So it facilitates the hiring process, which is also a pretty cool thing. Now, this is another moment where Diane and I are going to give you a bit of a legal flag. When it comes to assessment, there are laws around it. There are certain things that you can ask pre-employment. Like there's one that we use called a Step 1. And the Step 1 survey, what it does is it checks integrity. Is this somebody who's going to show up at work on time? Might they do drugs at work? It falls within a category that you can only use this instrument pre-employment, not post-employment. So certain assessments can be applied in different places, and make sure you know the rules around that. And the other thing that I say, and I love what you say, I always look at the three parts. One is I get your past experience, so I want to learn about that. Two, the assessment gives me some serious data points, and then I do want to interview you. I want to be able to see you, and seeing you can be a video, just like we're here today. But to have that face-to-face interaction, I always like my rule of three. I want those 3 data points.
Exactly. I think that's really important. So assessments can really be used as an important part of the process, and even in advance of the actual in-person interviews. So like you said, you can develop some of your questions around the results of those findings in the assessment.
Exactly. All right, so let's talk about a couple of other things. So we're in the bottom of the funnel, and we're trying to weed out, and we're going to hire. Let's talk about background checks and drug tests. Should I, shouldn't I, and what's important?
Well, it really depends on the role and what the company's philosophy is. Some roles do require a background check and a drug screen, especially if you're going for security clearance or if you're driving a company vehicle. It's always something that needs to be checked into. Other times it's an option. So whether you want to do a criminal check or a credit check, a motor vehicle record check, all of those kinds of things, sometimes it's an option. And you want to make sure that you're informing the candidates in advance and getting their sign-off and approval on that in advance.
By the way, on both of those, exactly what Diane said, the candidate has to participate. And for you to look at it relative to roles, you know, you definitely, if you're going to have somebody in a vehicle and they're going to be driving, it might be a good idea for you to check their driving record. The other one we 100% recommend, if you have somebody in your business going to be handling money, that we do recommend that you check their credit. It's really an important thing. And unfortunately, statistically, this is really sad. You know, if you look at resumes and things that people are sharing, is 25% of the content, what they tell you is it's inaccurate. And, it might be inaccurate with dates, but you can also check their employment background. Things that are pretty common is that you come through and you're checking their employment, where they live, what their education is, their driving record, and their credit. Those tend to be in, and to get a full background check, it's about $100. So, you have to ask yourself, is it going to save you something on the back end? And relative to drug testing, with all the different laws that are going on and with the legalization of cannabis, et cetera, a lot of employers are foregoing drug tests, to be quite honest, across the board. But if you have somebody who's in a critical position that it's also going to affect your insurance, well, we seriously recommend that you do a drug test, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Because it really does all come together. All right, well, here's the other one, and I know we've had this. What are your thoughts around reference checks?
Well, some people have a strong opinion about that, and I think reference checks can certainly be done. Again, you want to ask for professional kinds of reference checks, some people that know that person well in a professional kind of setting. And I think it's also important, if you are choosing to do reference checks, that you get a nice sampling of folks that have supervised that individual, co-workers, and then perhaps people that have reported to that person as well. So I think it's important to get a good sampling, and then to ask open-ended kinds of questions, but then make sure that you're asking the same questions of every reference that you're including in the process.
By the way, I'm one of those people, I'm a big proponent of reference checks. Now, for larger companies, quite a few companies will not allow bosses, et cetera, to have comments. But somewhere you can find individuals that are willing to give reference checks. And one way or another, I can tell you we've never not been able to get some references. What I love about them is when you're interviewing a candidate, questions may arise. And there's questions where it's like, I wonder how this person operated in this way or did this, or I'm seeing that maybe they can be a little too gregarious, or they're maybe a little introverted. It gives you a question that you can ask somebody that they've worked for, or a coworker, if you are observing a behavior, and they'll give you a good solid perspective on it. So
exactly.
I'm a big proponent. Now, here's the other thing that I'm a big proponent on with reference checks. When you're coming through the cycle, you're going to have a recruiter or an HR person that is going to be running that process. Whoever it is that is engaging with the candidate, and going back to what Diane said earlier, keep those communications going, I think that whoever does the reference check should be somebody independent, not the same person, because if you're not careful, you'll have bias built into the questioning.
Exactly.
So we always try to mix it up. So let's talk about, in wrapping up our bottom of the funnel, so we go to hire. Now, when we go to hire, any points about extending that offer or understanding it? And the one that I'm going to start with is, we actually encourage you to be transparent about the pay scale up front and ask the candidate what they're looking for. You don't hold pay to the very end, because you don't want to be so far apart that you wasted all this time with a candidate that you could never afford.
That's such a good point, Melody. I've had it so many times where salary or wages are left to the very end to talk about, and a lot of times you can't come together on it. So it's best to get that kind of a discussion kind of cleared away up front, to make sure at least you're in the realm of reason, the same kind of parameters, maybe not exact specifics on the salary, but make sure that you're kind of in the same general vicinity with each other. So you want to make sure that, and that can be a deal breaker at the end.
One of the things that we actually like to do is we like to have the HR side, so we kind of clear the path, but we actually like the hiring manager, whoever the boss is, to make the final offer, because it's really kind of a cool thing. And if we've cleared the path up front and we know that candidate's interested, the salary's in range, we tend to be that middle negotiator between the two, and we do check to make sure that the company is paying a competitive wage where they can, but it is a partnership, so both have to give in different places, and there are different benefits and different trade-offs that matter to workers. It's not all about salary, so we kind of set that up, and then having them offer. And it's really important that you get a formal offer letter out, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And are there any particulars around that formal offer letter that people should be aware of?
Well, I think it's important to, give an outline of the position itself within the offer letter, the salary. The start date is always important to have outlined if you can. And also having an opportunity for the candidate to sign off on that offer letter and acknowledge that they are joining the company on this date. And then having the hiring manager or the CEO of the company also signing that acknowledgement too.
And it's really important. Salary, position, start date. Those become your three components. And one thing, you guys, just so everybody knows, you might be thinking you got a 90-day period. 90-day periods don't really exist anymore. It just depends on where you're at. It really is, if you are a work for hire state, it's a day by day. Honest days pay for honest days work. So the 90-day period of we're going to test you, that's a thing of the past, just so you know now. But what is now, so replaced by onboarding. Onboarding is incredibly important. Why? What have we learned?
Well, we need to make sure that the candidate is really coming on board and they're really being assimilated and becoming part of the family. So you want to make sure that right away that candidate feels like I'm here and I'm part of the family, I'm accepted, I understand the expectations, I kind of understand the company culture. And onboarding is a process of getting that candidate acclimated and so that then the other team members feel like they're getting to know the candidate as well. So you're really becoming a part of the group, a part of the tribe or the family.
Yeah,
so,
by the way, I love the way you said that. You know, one of the things, it's make that person's first day, just in terms of real simple things, make that first day special. Make sure that somebody's there engaging them. The other thing is the hiring manager needs to unequivocally get with that individual. Talk about preferences, leadership style. What are the objectives during the first 90 days so that that person knows where what they need to do to be successful, that they meet the team and people that they're going to be working with. And if it's clients, set up client schedules. What I have seen, some of the mistakes in the first 90 days, people show up, they don't feel welcome, they don't have all their tools, and here's where they get into real hiccups. Maybe I'm a person, I use my phone and I'm a big texter. Maybe you're a big phone caller or whatever that is, and we miss each other because we don't even use the same communication mechanisms.
Exactly. And companies have a culture of their own. You know, a lot of companies are kind of a texting culture, or they're more of a, an email culture or whatnot. It's important to even point out those kinds of dynamics to a new hire, and so that they know, what is it like to be here, and how can I best communicate with folks, and how do we get things done.
By the way, that is so true, and it's so funny how we make assumptions about each other. There just may be a style, as maybe one person that you hired comes in and they say good morning to everybody when they're going to the desk, and you've got another person that they tend to be a little more introverted and they head to their desk. It's amazing the things that can be misinterpreted in the first 90 days. So put some time and attention. Now, the other thing about that 90-day period, have a regular checkpoint with your new employer if you are the managing, the boss, if you're the boss. The other thing that we recommend is that you have a regular checkpoint in that 90 days with HR. So it's like on two sides. Now, you know what? This is something that we can go on and on about, but we want to end the show by saying congratulations on your new employee. You got through the funnel, you found somebody, and you've hired them. And the other thing I want to share with you is we have a couple of shows that are coming up where we're going to be covering the 90-day onboarding period. And we're also going to cover in more detail how to go about interviewing. So with that, I want to thank you for being with us today. Diane, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And here is every Tuesday. We air every Tuesday, 3 p.m. Mountain Time. We are on Facebook, so facebook.com/our results. You missed a show, don't worry about it. We have all these past shows on i2iworkforce.com/hire-results. We have a fantastic library. On top of that, please let us know if you have any questions or we can share anything. We have an amazing library, everything from a HR checklist for the entire year where we dig into legal issues with HR, benefits, all kinds of fantastic things. So with that, we'll see you next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And until then, see you on the internet.